Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to National Payroll Week, where we're running a series of webinars for you to come along to and learn a bit more about a variety of payroll topics. My name is Alice, and I'm going to be hosting and presenting the session today. I'm also joined by my colleagues Duncan and Matt, who are going to be helping me with questions in the background. And let's take a look at what we're going to cover in this morning's session too. So I'm going to begin with what is RTI, so an introduction to real-time information. We'll then move on to the main section of the webinar. So this is going to be all about the HMRC submissions, what they are, kind of breaking them down a little bit, and what information they include and when to send them as well. And I'll follow that up with some key dates and deadlines, so a bit of a recap of the submissions and a reminder of any important dates and deadlines that you need to be aware of. And then I do just have a small section at the end on the personal tax account, so what it is, any key features and benefits as well. But let's begin with an introduction to RTI. So RTI stands for Real-Time Information, and it's a system where employers report payroll data to HMRC, ensuring up-to-date and accurate tax records. Now, it's not been around forever, but it was introduced to employers operating a PAYE scheme in April 2013, and that was the 6th of April, so the beginning of the tax year. Previously, employers would have submitted certain forms to HMRC at the end of the tax year, which had these details on instead, so your P35, your P14, and forms if they had any new starters or leavers. But RTI has changed all of that. The RTI submissions now include all of the information that HMRC need, so no more paper forms, and instead it's actually reported more regularly too. So employers must report PAYE to HMRC every time that they pay their employees, and that's on or before the pay date. This is called the FPS, or the full payment submission. So if you did a weekly payroll and your next pay date was tomorrow, for example, Friday the 6th, you would have to report the payroll data for this week on the 6th or before the 6th, so today or tomorrow. And the same principle applies to all payment frequencies as well. But if you've not paid any employees in a tax month and you need to inform HMRC that no payment is due, you must report this to them in a different submission, and that's called an EPS, or Employer Payment Summary. There are some other scenarios where you would send an EPS as well, which we will get into a little bit later. So you'll have heard of some of these submissions before, hopefully you'll have sent some as well, but as I said, we'll dig a bit deeper into them during the course of the webinar. So RTI is a mandatory system introduced by HMRC. It is important that you remain compliant and meet the deadlines. If employers don't comply with the RTI requirements, not only could this lead to incorrect tax and national insurance records for your employees, but as an employer, it would also lead to consequences like penalties or specific charges as well. But if you do have any queries or need any support with these requirements, we would encourage you to contact HMRC themselves. I've also got loads of helpful links to further support throughout the slides, so be sure to get those handouts downloaded and you'll have access to all of those. Now moving on to the government gateway as well, because in order to actually submit the payroll data and meet these RTI requirements, employers do need to set up a government gateway account to access HMRC's online services. And normally it's your login for this account, so for your government gateway, which connects the payroll to the government gateway to be able to submit that data across to HMRC. This also gives employers access to HMRC's PAYE online service, and that gives you access to loads of handy resources online, such as checking what you owe HMRC, paying any bills, seeing any payment history, accessing tax codes or notices about your employees, and more as well. Now, a lot of you probably already have this set up, but for any of you who are new to payroll or just taking over, definitely worth looking into and making sure that you've got that all set up on that side of things as well. So that is your government gateway account. But let's look at a little timeline of RTI that I've put together. There was some interesting dates in here. We actually begin back in 1944, so this was the introduction of the pay-as-you-earn system. This was introduced to streamline the collection of income tax directly from employees' wage. So it's more regular as well, whereas previously people would have completed an annual assessment and only pay tax due kind of a few times during the year. We then jump along to 2004, 2005 with online reporting. And this is where employers began submitting PAYE information online, and it actually marks the first major shift towards digital reporting. Another little jump forward to April 2012, where the phased introduction of RTI began. So there was an RTI pilot that started in April 2012 with a small number of volunteer employers, and this increased in 3 stages throughout the year up to March 2013, by which time over 6 million individual records were being reported in real time. And then just a month later, April 2013, RTI became mandatory for all employers, requiring them to submit payroll data to HMRC on or before each payday. And if we fast forward to today, RTI is fully integrated into the payroll process, and it encourages and ensures accurate and timely reporting to HMRC. So it's been around a little over 10 years. But that was your introduction to RTI, a little bit about what it is and the history of it as well. I will now move on to the main section of the webinar. So this is going to be going through your HMRC submissions and breaking them down a little bit further. So we'll start with the full payment submission. This is probably the most common submission that will be sent. And as we now know, you do need to send an FPS each time you pay your employees to notify HMRC of the liabilities in the payment period and your payroll data as well. And all employees who are paid need to be included. The liability is made up from tax, so your PAYE, employers and employees' national insurance contributions, student loan and postgraduate loan. And when I say liabilities in the payment period, what that's referring to is the amount of money that a business or individual owes HMRC. So it's essentially the money that you owe them. But the liability isn't the only thing that makes up the FPS though. It also includes payment and deduction details, employer information, tax and national insurance information, any new starters or leavers that you might have had, employees' pension contributions, student loan indicators, and payment dates. So although you can't normally see all of this information going across in the submission itself, it is there just being sent across in the background. So that's what the FPS is and what's included. And just a reminder of when it's needed as well. So it must be submitted after processing each pay run on or before the pay date. So let's say I run a monthly payroll, for example. My pay date this month will be the 30th of September. I need to make sure that my FPS is submitted on or before that date. And it is important to mention you only need to send one FPS per payment frequency and per their payment period. For example, once per month or once per week or fortnight, whatever your payment frequency is. But if you run a payroll where you've got monthly and weekly staff, for example, you would send one FPS, including all of your monthly employees when you process them. Then each week when you process your weekly staff, you would send an FPS, including all those weekly employees each week. And lastly, what is the FPS used for? Well, HMRC use the FPS to keep track of the employees' pay, tax and national insurance contributions, and it also helps to ensure more accurate calculations of various benefits to employees, reducing the risk of overpayments or underpayments. And you can find a little bit more about what's included in the FPS just using that link at the bottom of the slide. So let's move on to probably the second most common submission that you might have to do. This is the EPS, or the Employer Payment Summary. This submission is sent to report values to HMRC that aren't included in the full payment submission. So this could be things like your statutory payments if you need to reclaim them, CIS deductions, apprenticeship levy, or even to inform HMRC that no payment is due in a particular tax month. So you only need to send this EPS if any of those apply to you. And just to kind of reiterate there, so when I say statutory payments, statutory sick pay is no longer able to be reclaimed from HMRC. So that it'll be things like your maternity pay, adoption pay, paternity pay. But when should the EPS be sent? Well, it should be sent by the 19th of the following tax month. So August's EPS, for example, would need to be sent by the 19th of September, the following month. And something that differs between the FPS and the EPS is how often to send it, as the EPS only needs to be sent once per tax month, and that's regardless of your payment frequency. So even if you do pay your staff more often than monthly, the EPS is like a month-end task. So once you've processed all of the payment periods in a tax month, that's when you would send it if you needed to. The easiest way to think of it is the FPS tells HMRC how much you need to pay them, but then the EPS tells HMRC how much you're reducing that payment by. So it's allowing you to apply for a reduction in your liability. And a little top tip as well, if you do forget to submit your EPS by the deadline, so by the 19th of the following tax month, you can submit an EPS when you process the next period. So each EPS includes year-to-date values, so HMRC will receive the totals for the whole tax year so far, even if you have missed a certain period. And also check your P32 report. So if you're not sure whether you need to send one, check this report. And if you've got a value in the total NIC deductions line, you will need to send an EPS. So this could be made up from apprenticeship levy, or if you had an employee on statutory maternity pay, for example. But that is your employer payment summary. So they're definitely the two most common submissions, but there are some more that I would like to talk about. Bear in mind, some of these might have slightly different names depending on your software provider, but this is just going to give a bit more guidance on what they include and what information goes across to HMRC. We know that payroll doesn't go smoothly 100% of the time. There will be times where corrections are needed. So you might need to go back to correct something in a pay run that you have already completed, and that's normal. But what happens to the FPS in that situation? Because you can only send one FPS in the tax period, and HMRC do still need to be notified of any corrections that you've made and any adjustments to the liability as well. So in this situation, you would need to send something called an FPS adjustment. And this includes the corrected values for your payroll and the updated liability as well. So HMRC will have the latest information for you and for your employees. Now the steps to do this submission will differ depending on which payroll that you use, but I do have a few examples with some of our Sage products. So first example is going to be in Sage 50 Payroll. So once you've made all of your corrections and your payroll is up to date, you can't send another normal FPS, but this is when you would be able to submit the FPS adjustment to HMRC, and that'll be a separate option in the programme for you. Something to note with an adjustment as well is, although the submission only shows the values for the most recent period that you've corrected, any prior periods that you've amended are going to be included in the submission's year-to-dates. So if you've corrected a couple of months or a couple of weeks, this one FPS adjustment will include all of those changes to any year-to-dates. And another example as well, this time for Sage Payroll or Sage Business Cloud Payroll, is that you'd make your changes in corrections mode, and once they're made, you'll confirm the changes and an FPS adjustment will automatically be sent to HMRC, which again will make sure that they're up to date with those latest payroll values. So just to recap that, you've sent your normal FPS, but then you've had to go and make changes to payroll, which means those figures that were sent originally are no longer correct. And that's why you would need to send the adjustment. But as for the EPS, so if your corrections have affected those year-to-date values for your statutory payments or CIS deductions and things, you will just need to send another EPS with the updated year-to-dates. So as long as you've not missed the deadline for the tax month, you can just send that again. But as we've learned, if you do miss the deadline, you have missed it by the 19th of the next month, you can just send a new EPS next period, and that will include the year-to-date values. So it will include all of the prior tax months in the current tax year. And again, I have linked some more HMRC guidance on these slides for when it comes to correcting mistakes in payroll, more specifically for mistakes in your FPSs and EPSs, and that's just at the bottom of this slide. So these submissions that I've gone through, the FPS, the EPS and the FPS adjustment, they're all submissions for the current tax year. But what if you've had to go back and amend a previous tax year's figure? Because again, HMRC must be notified. So with RTI, you will have the option to submit an FPS adjustment for a previous tax year, or it might be called something like amending a previous tax year. But this means that if you have changed anything in the previous tax year, you are able to notify HMRC of this, which you must do. So this submission will give HMRC the updated year-to-dates and just help to ensure that your employees' records and calculations are correct. Something to bear in mind though is that some providers are only able to submit these amendments for a few tax years earlier. So for any tax years earlier than your software can submit for, you will likely be able to use HMRC's Basic Tools software. I know this does allow you to submit for earlier tax years, but if you do need to use this, we of course would always encourage you to speak with HMRC first, just to see what's best for you to do in your scenario. But you are able to amend previous tax years if you've gone back to do any corrections. So let's move on to the last few submissions that I want to talk about today. So next up is employment allowance. This is an EPS submission, but it's not the same as the EPS that we've just spoke about. So this submission actually allows you to apply for employment allowance, and it means that eligible employers can reduce their annual national insurance liability by up to £5,000. So employers will pay less employers' Class 1 national insurance each time they run payroll until that £5,000 allowance is gone, or until the tax year ends, whichever is sooner. And you can claim employment allowance if you're a business or charity and your Class 1 national insurance liabilities were less than £100,000 in the previous tax year. Now this is ideally applied for at the beginning of the tax year, but that is not vital. You can apply for it and claim it at any time in the tax year. But of course, the earlier that you apply for it and claim it, the sooner that you will get that allowance. So you would check last year's figures, probably as part of your year-end process or payroll year-end. And if your employer's national insurance liabilities were less than £100,000 in that previous tax year that you've just ended, you should be eligible for employment allowance. And it is quick and easy to apply for it as well. So you can do this through your payroll software if it allows, or you can also do it through HMRC's basic PAYE tools. So there are a few options for this. But that is employment allowance, and it's kind of like an EPS application that you would send across. And another submission that you may or may not know about is national insurance verification requests, otherwise known as NVRs. So if you're unsure what a new or existing employee's national insurance number is, you are able to request this information from HMRC with this submission. And again, this can be submitted from your payroll software or through HMRC's basic tools as well. So you've got a couple of options there. Now, NVRs aren't mandatory either. Some of you might have never sent one. Some of you may never send one, but you only need to submit one when you need to verify or obtain an employee's national insurance number. And once you've submitted it, you might end up having to wait for a response on this submission. But in the meantime, you can actually still process payroll without a national insurance number for an employee without affecting the tax or national insurance calculations until you obtain that number. but later the employer might legitimately request this information so that they can verify that not only have you got the right to work in the UK, but also limit your chances of becoming a victim to identity theft as well, which does happen. So employees should be encouraged to apply for and provide the national insurance number as soon as possible, as this does impact elements such as pension tax relief and their state pension benefits too. And I have just linked at the bottom, if you do want to check an employee's national insurance number using the basic tools from HMRC, I've just linked straight to that there at the bottom. But that is the majority of RTI submissions. That's all of the ones I am going to go through today. So what they are, what information they include, and what that kind of sends across to HMRC too. So some are sent more regularly, like the FPS, whereas others, like the employment allowance application, are only actually sent once per year. But moving on to the next section, this is going to be a bit of a recap of those key dates and deadlines on the submissions, and a bit of an example of when you would send each of the submissions as well. So feel free to take notes, of course, or download the handouts, which has all of the slides and all of this information in. So we'll start with the FPS first. So FPS deadline is on or before each payday. An example would be that my pay date is the last day of each month, so I must submit my FPS on or before this date to remain compliant. And the same goes with weekly. If you paid on every Friday, for example, each week's FPS needs to be sent on or before each Friday, including those weekly employees. We've then got the Employer Payment Summary, or EPS. Deadline for this is the 19th of the following month. So if I processed August's pay run and wanted to reclaim some statutory payments, CIS deductions or apprenticeship levy, I would need to submit an EPS by the 19th of September. But remember, this is a once per tax month submission, and if you do forget, the EPS can actually be sent the following month or in a later period, as it does include year-to-date values. So just a reminder there, even if you do run a weekly payroll, the EPS is a month-end task once a month. The FPS adjustment is next, so no hard deadline for this one, other than as soon as you've rectified any mistakes and you're back up to date again, you would submit the adjustments to notify HMRC. And this is for corrections in the current tax year. So let's say I'd submitted my normal FPS for August, but then I'd went back to fix somebody's pay. The original figures that I'd submitted to HMRC on the normal FPS are no longer correct. So I would then need to submit the adjustment for August's liability to update HMRC on any changes. We've then got amending a previous tax year. It's a similar thing to the FPS adjustment, but again for a previous tax year. And same again with the FPS adjustment, no hard deadline other than as soon as you've corrected the mistakes and changed anything that needs changing. For example, I had to go back to last tax year and fix a couple of employees' pay. Once I've made those changes and re-updated that last tax year, I would need to let HMRC know. But with all of these submissions, if you are unsure, speak to your payroll provider or speak with HMRC just to check whether you do need to send an amendment and how you would go about doing so. And then last for you to recap as well. So the application for employment allowance, this is a once a year thing, but the sooner that you apply for this in the tax year, the sooner that you'll get the allowance. So if I was a business or charity and my Class 1 national insurance liabilities were less than £100,000 in the previous tax year to what I'm applying in, I could apply for employment allowance this tax year to reduce my national insurance liability by up to £5,000. So no deadline really, you can claim it any time during the year, but the sooner you claim it, the sooner you get the allowance. And lastly, NVRs are national insurance verification requests. So this is something that you would only submit if you've got a new or existing employee and you need to obtain their national insurance number. So for example, I've hired a new employee, but they haven't provided me with their national insurance number just yet. So I can process payroll without one for now, but as an employer, I should obtain this to verify their identity properly, to not only check that they've got the right to work in the UK, but also make sure that my records and their records are going to be correct. So just wanted to recap those submissions that I'd gone through earlier. And the last main section of the webinar that I'd like to talk about is the personal tax account. So not everyone knows about this, but I do think it's a really handy resource for individuals. So it's just to make you aware of it, really. So the personal tax account is an online service, and it allows people to check their records and manage their details with HMRC. And some of its key features are income tax management. So an individual can check their income tax estimate and tax code. They can view their income from work over the past 5 years and also check how much income tax they've paid in the previous 5 years as well. Tax returns and refunds. So an individual can fill in, send and view personal tax returns and claim any tax refunds that might be due. Personal details and benefits as well, so they can update the personal details like name and address, as well as check and manage any benefits such as child benefits and tax credits as well. Also national insurance and state pension, so they can update details about any of them. You've got employment and benefits from work as well, so they can update details about benefits that they might receive from work, such as company car details or medical insurance. And it's also where an individual can find their unique taxpayer reference as well. So this is essential for self-assessment and it can be easily found with this account, the personal tax account. So if you're not sure what this is, do take a look at the links on the slides. You can access it on your phone as well, so it doesn't just have to be a computer. So nice and convenient there. And yeah, lots of useful information and figures for the individual on their account. So this will be a good one just to make employees aware of. And one last thing that I would like to leave you with before we move on to the further support is a diagram, I guess you would call it, of the RTI process. So this is just going to show a bit more of a visual way of everything we spoke about in this session. So what RTI does and what it's kind of used for as well. So we'll start with the employer, which I'm imagining is most of you watching this today. So the company, the payroll, the employer. So the payroll would be processed, and during this process, the pay slips are produced for the employees, followed by the payments and deductions to the employee. So the employee gets paid. That's made up of a variety of payments and deductions. And if we go back up to the employer, so back up to the payroll, they would then submit the RTI, so your FPS, your EPS, which goes through your government gateway account. In your payroll software, you'll get a success message with confirmation of that submission, which then sends that payroll information across to HMRC. The information that HMRC gets can then be fed down the other way to the personal tax account, which the employee can then log into to check their records, manage their details, as well as lots more. So it's like the circle of RTI, I suppose. But I just wanted to end and kind of sum up what we've spoken about in the session. That does bring us to the end of the webinar content for Keeping It Real-Time Information. Your guide is submitting payroll to HMRC. Hopefully you found some of that information useful. I did want to use National Payroll Week just to give a bit more context about some of the payroll processes and tasks that you might be doing day in and day out. But before we do say goodbye though, still a few minutes to make you aware of some further support that we've got available. Starting with upcoming webinars. So I mentioned these at the beginning, but we've still got a couple left for National Payroll Week. And remember, if you attend at least 3 out of the 5, you will earn the National Payroll Week 2024 digital badge. So Duncan's got his session this afternoon, Parental Leave Essentials, Understanding Statutory Parental Payments. And we're actually both hosting the quiz tomorrow, so if you are free for that, we would love to see you. And again, if you do participate, you will be entered into a prize draw to win a fantastic hamper as well. We've also got the Sage Help Centre as well, so sage.co.uk/help. If you are needing any help with any of your Sage products, you can just search in keywords. You can choose the topic, choose the product that you've got, find support guides, any videos, and also get in touch with any of our experts as well if you need any technical support. We also have Sage University, so this is sageu.com. You can set up a free account on here, and we've got loads and loads of learning across loads of products on here. So e-learning courses, bite-sized learning, and it's a way of earning product certification as well. Hello everyone, that's just me back again. Thank you for all of those questions. It looks like Duncan and Matt have managed to answer all of those. So again, thank you for your time this morning. Hopefully you found that session useful. Keep an eye on your emails as well for a recording of the webinar coming through. That should be coming through to you this afternoon. So you can rewatch this as many times as you need to. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Hopefully we'll see you on another webinar, maybe this week for National Payroll Week, or if not very soon. So on behalf of me, Duncan and Matt, we will see you next time. Goodbye for now.